So I'm Judith Walls. I'm the new chair for sustainability management at the Institute for Economy and the Environment. My research basically looks mostly at environmental governance. Specifically, I look a lot at corporate governance issues and how this affects the environmental and social performance of companies. But I also do look at other aspects of governance, whether that could be over the supply chain of a company or more generally issues related to biodiversity and land use. So for example, I have an interesting project on trophy hunting that looks at the debate around trophy hunting and how issues like emotions play a huge role in that debate. A lot of my research looks at the very top of the organization, so that would be CEOs, sometimes top management teams, and also board of directors, and how the people that are at the top of the organization affect the company's environmental or social performance. So I have a lot of research in this area, and what's interesting about it is that it seems to be the case that individuals really can make a difference when they're at the top of the organization, when they have some kind of inclination towards greening the company or being socially responsible. So for example, when you have a CEO that has experience with environmental topics, that CEO has a form of informal power, as we call it, which means they can, through their expertise and through their own knowledge, influence the rest of the organization. What kinds of experience matters? It could be both formal experience through job training, whether that person has maybe had a prior role in, say, an environmental health and safety department, or has been on a committee of a board of another company that dedicates, looks at these kinds of issues. But what's really interesting is that it can also be a sort of non-job related experience. So we might find that a CEO has had an opportunity to go to Bangladesh and hang out in a very local environment to learn about water issues for communities. Or we have a person who as a child went on a field trip to nature and has had a lot of engagement in that. These kinds of experience tend to be lasting and they make a difference throughout a person's life, or they can suddenly transform an individual and make them see things differently. And so that kind of informal experience or non-job related experience can actually be really important for driving top-level executives towards greening issues. So yeah, we can look for different characteristics of top executives or board managers. So when companies are hiring for these positions, we can, for example, look for clues as to what kind of individuals would make a meaningful difference. One thing we can look at, maybe somewhat unexpectedly, is whether or not the person has an MBA versus something else like a law economics degree. Our research shows that actually people with MBAs tend to view environmental and social issues as a potential strategic opportunity, almost like a win-win situation. Whereas someone who comes more from a legal type of background tends to focus on the risk and litigation. And that can be somewhat limiting because that means companies tend to do less rather than sort of explore and take the opportunity to do more about environmental issues. Another way that we can look for clues is, for example, age. This is especially important at the level of the board of directors. In general, on average, for example, in the United States, board members tend to be 60 years old, they tend to be white, they tend to be male. And when we break away from that mold, especially in terms of age, and look at a younger generation of board members, or at least a few people on the board that are younger people tend to care more about environmental and social issues. And so having these people on a board will mean that the company will focus on it more. The other aspect that is really important for this is the context that the company finds itself in. So for example, I've done some research with colleagues that looks at where the company is headquartered. And if the company is headquartered in a state in the United States that is more liberal versus a state that is more conservative, we find that this makes a difference in terms of how proactive the company will be on environmental and social issues, with the ones being in the more liberal states being more proactive. The other type of context that really matters is the financial situation of the company. Companies that are facing financial distress, meaning that they haven't had a solid performance financially for the past 3 years, are actually less likely to do things on environmental and sustainable issues because they need to focus on financial issues. However, when a new CEO comes in, it matters whether that CEO comes from the outside of the company or whether this is a CEO that's internally promoted. When the CEO comes from the inside of the company, there are legacy issues with stakeholders. That person most likely has already been involved with environmental and social stakeholders that are relevant to the company. And so that new CEO cannot completely ignore these stakeholders, and they will find more of a balance between the financial needs of the company and these other stakeholders. And so then the question becomes, what does the company really want? Do they want to focus on short-term financial gain and improvement, where maybe you would want to hire a CEO from the outside? Or do we want to think about longer-term issues, and even though the company is struggling financially, maybe we need to find a balance with still maintaining these environmental and social issues? Basically, my research is starting to show that one individual in the company can make a real difference, whether that person is in the leadership, the top executives, especially the CEO, or even when it's somebody or several people on the board of directors. And I've seen that both of these things matter. When you've got somebody in the company that really cares about environmental and social issues, based on their background, based on their experience, based on the ability to engage other people in the organization, then it really matters.